Hello and welcome to the Domestic Workers Chronicles, where we talk everything domestic workers, everything about auntie, the good, the bad, and the ugly, and life and everything in between. I spoke in the previous episodes about the importance of training. And as I said, we are in a process, and I think as we transform as a country, we want to be looking at the sector and making sure that the sector is formalized. Now, we cannot ignore the history of this sector. I became very interested in this sector in 2004 when I had to source a domestic worker for my child. And this child was my firstborn, and she was my everything. And at the time, I just bought my first house in Lowly, and I just wanted someone who can do this amazing things and can be so appreciative of that opportunity, for the fact that with the little salary that I was getting from the bank, I was willing to cut some kind of nyana, piece nyana for them, and only to find that, oh, in real life, it doesn't work like that. And one of the things that really just struck me at the time was that I was a domestic worker. And I just need to brief you as to when I became a domestic worker. I was 18, 19. And it was something that I had to do because I had no other skill to offer to the economy. So it was something I did out of desperation. And I think from that year, I embarked on a journey where I wanted to do a thorough research about the sector. And truly, you know, when you look for something, something finds you. I really became aggressive in studying the sector and understanding why there's so many imbalances, exploitation, marginalization, misbehavior, issues around this sector. It made no sense to me because when I became a domestic worker, it was one of the jobs that I appreciated up to this day. Because I remember my auntie Manifundi, she's in Mamelodi. She said, listen, she was working for the CSIR at the time. She was a tea lady and she was a cleaner. And she said, listen, I'll look for something for you. I mean, along those lines. I mean, I just finished matric, had no skills. And she found me a job as a domestic worker with one of her senior managers in Sunnyside. And at the time, it was so glamorous to stay in Sunnyside. It was white, it was clean, it was beautiful. And when I got that job and I asked, okay, what will I be doing? And they said, oh, you'll be cooking and cleaning and taking care of 2 kids. I was 18, 19. I was a child myself. I got so excited. And I said, and they said, you stay in that house. And I said, do I buy my own food? And she said, no, you don't buy your own food. Actually, they give you food. And I sleep in the house, yes. And I've got a private room, yes. And at the time, I was staying in for a week and staying out for 1 week. So it was just, you know, kind of hybrid. I was doing both, stay in and stay out at the same time. I got so excited. That was my approach. That's how I looked at it. I thought, my God, I cook, clean, take care of my siblings and do all these things in Soshanguve Kohai, and nobody pays me. And someone is willing to pay me to do that. So that's how I looked at it. And later in life, I realized not everybody looks at it that way. And that's how I got exposed to the marginalization and looking down syndrome of domestic workers. And then I was young, you know, and I think, you know, for Universe knew my journey. That was part of what I had to go through to get to where I am today. So that's how I got into the space, you know, as a domestic worker, and later assisting my colleagues getting domestic workers, and later literally registering a company to source and train and place domestic workers called Made for You. That was the short and long of it, of how I got into the space. So when I resigned at HSBC at the Johannesburg Stock Exchange, I remember, you know, for me, and that was after long researches and investigation and understanding how the sector works. And I really need to give big ups to vets, business students who really were open enough to let me in and say, oh, actually, we're doing a study about this sector and we can share the research document with you. When I went and knocked at the Department of Labor, I found Professor Sean Feldman, and he was so welcoming. And he said, Lindy, well, why do you want to know about this sector? I mean, you are within the finance sector, you're doing well. And I said, I don't know, I'm just drawn to this space so that I can understand better. And he exposed me to a lot of things that were happening in the sector, challenges that were there, and he introduced me to SATSAO, which was at the time the Domestic Workers Union. And I remember meeting Metal, God rest her beautiful soul. I remember meeting May Eunice. I remember meeting Bo Pinky and having a meeting with them, and them inviting me later to their congress in that union, and them speaking about challenges that were in that space. And at the back of me having research documents from Wits Business School, having research documents from the Department of Labor, and having been exposed to these women in being in their presence and in those congresses, it was such an eye-opener. And I realized, oh my God, I'm drawn into the space, therefore I need to know more and learn more. But not only do that, craft a solution. So when we look at this sector, we have a lot of agencies that are mushrooming. Agencies are mushrooming, guys. I spoke about this in previous episodes, and people say, no, I've registered a company, therefore I can place domestic workers and what. And I'm pleading with employers, potential employers, those who employ domestic workers, let's be sensitive. Let's be sensitive. In every episode, I'll probably emphasize this. You're bringing someone into your space, into your sanctuary, into your house. It doesn't matter whether it's once a week, twice a week, every day, and whatever. It's a care worker who takes care of your mother in Polokwane whilst you are in Gauteng. It doesn't matter. The fact that there is a human being that is coming into that space, it becomes important that we interrogate. And not only do we interrogate, we screen, we check, we vet. Not only do we screen, vet, and check, we also comply. Now we've got a responsibility in this sector as employers or potential employers. We also need to make sure that for peace of mind, we cover ourselves. Make sure your domestic worker on a contract. It can be on 1-pager, it can be a 10-pager, it doesn't matter. Let us know what you need. We'll put it together for you. Right? And if there's an element of exploitation or illegality or anything that is just not just, we will definitely advise you. We've been in this sector for many years. So we will definitely advise you. And the birth of Made For You at the back of this research came from my own personal frustrations of getting someone who can be as excited as I was when I got this opportunity. Because it just blew my mind that someone will pay me for doing what I'm doing at my mother's house. Over and above that, feed me. Over and above that, accommodate me at no rental amount. For me, I was so excited. And only to find that other people actually look at this as some kind of slavery. But what I wanted to say at the beginning of this shoot was the history of where the sector comes from plays an important role. Remember, when domestic workers were introduced, not only in South Africa, but globally, they were deemed as slaves. So slavery played an important role in the creation of domestic workers. That's why the term maid, sometimes people look at it as, why do you call them maid? But let me tell you one thing about that title. I always say to my domestic workers, it doesn't matter what you do. It's not about what you do. Whether you call me a maid or kitchen girl or a domestic worker, it shouldn't matter to you. The fact that I am providing for my children is what is important. And what defines me is not the title of what I do. Because Lindiwe is defined by much more than a CEO, an entrepreneur, and whatnot. At the end of the day, take away these titles, Lindiwe remains. So I always teach them that don't even pay too much attention to the title. So, but I understand the sensitivity towards the title because it's born of slavery. So when you look at the history of domestic work, it was something that was introduced for black people to work for the minority and sort of in a slavery way, right? And also in that particular sector, be segmented according to their complexion. So if you look at, I think there was a documentary done about colorism. And they said, oh, if you are light in complexion during slavery years, you would be then working within the household. If you are dark, you go to the field or you work outside. So, I mean, there's a huge documentary on that. So I think as employers and potential employers of domestic workers, we also need to sort of be sensitive around the history of where it comes from. And not only just the history, but also the current situation. Like I said in previous episodes, personally, I became a domestic worker out of desperation. It was not my dream to become a domestic worker. My dream was to become an accountant. I remember asking my father and saying, yo, we are so poor. Is there any career that I can choose that works with money? Anything to do with money. Guys, I cannot be sitting in this impoverished situation any longer. And my father said, oh, you can become a banker or an accountant. The one thing he neglected to tell me is that the money you'll be managing will not be yours. But I chose the career based on the fact that I'll be working with money. But in the meanwhile, towards my ultimate dream, I became a domestic worker. And that sector just sort of caught me. And I'm still trapped in that space of trying to make it better. There's a philosopher who said, when you come into the space, any space, your objective is to make sure that you leave that space better than how you found it. And I think I've tried my best to live in that philosophy, not only in the business itself, but also in my own private household, in everything I do. I've got 2 domestic workers. I've got 2 helpers working in my house. I've got Umampi that I'm so fond of. I've got another lady who comes in on a temporary basis, but they'll tell you one thing about me. If after eating, I try to just rinse the dishes and make sure that the space is better so it doesn't look like I had lunch. So I've been living with that philosophy for quite a number of years. But my advice to employers, potential employers of domestic workers is be sensitive towards the history of where this thing is coming from. Be sensitive to the fact that someone who enters the space, as much as we are in a transition and trying to professionalize and making sure that people go in the space by choice, there is desperation that comes from potential workers in that space. And desperation, guys, come with a lot of negativity. Because desperation means I'm doing this in the process of going to my better. I'm doing this so that I can get so much in the process and leave. Really, desperation sometimes, when you are motivated by desperation, you are saying, what is my next? You are not focusing on the current. You are focusing on what is my next. And therefore, employers need to be sensitive towards that fact. And these are facts that you need to be asking when you employ somebody. During those conversations that we don't want to call interviews, you must ask these kind of questions. And of course, we acknowledge that there are domestic workers that have been in this space for so many years that they are at a point where they are saying, I'm okay, I'm here, this is my profession, therefore let's go, right? Especially foreign workers. And I'm not saying, they are better workers than South African workers. I promised you an episode on nationality, different strengths and weaknesses, and I'll definitely deliver that to you. But today I just want to speak of making sure that you are conscious of when I employ a domestic worker, most of them is not by choice, it's because of their situation and circumstances, but you have a small minority that have been in the sector for too long and understand the advantages of being in the sector. Because definitely there are advantages of being in the sector. Most people don't know. I registered for my first year and some of the funds that I got were raised by my former employer. So there are advantages, and we'll talk about the advantage of being in that space for young people that feel like, oh, this is what? Am I going to wear an apron and people are going to make me wipe poo and whatnot? We are going to talk about pleasant working environments and advantages of being in that sector and viewing that sector as professional. Right? So employers today advise you to not just be sensitive around the history of the sector, but also be sensitive around why a person wants to be a domestic worker. And I'm excluding those ones that have been domestic workers for quite a number of years, the ones that got to a place of, this is my sector and therefore I shall grow in this sector. I promise you an episode of the advantages and the disadvantages of the sector, both employers and employees, meaning that, well, Auntie, I'll be telling you the amazing things of being in the sector And Bomedem, I'll also be telling you about the advantages, and I'll also be telling you about the disadvantages. And I know I promised you an episode on different nationalities, their strengths and their weaknesses. I haven't forgotten. Like the channel, subscribe. You will definitely get a notification when we start doing those episodes. Thank you so much for joining me. DM us, like us, subscribe, send us questions, send us stories. Let's unbundle these stories, these horror stories, and some pleasant stories, because some of us do have good domestic workers. And let's share and let's professionalize the sector. Thank you so much.